computer. Okay. So Dr. Bouse is going to talk to us tonight about the expressive arts and how they can be used to help people not only on their spiritual journeys, but also to access their creativity. And she also complements the expressive arts with shamanic techniques. I'm going to read you her biography, so you're more acquainted with her, her background. She's an author, psychologist, historian, and educator. She's the founder and director of the Institutes of Emerging Psychologies, an educational organization which seeks to create an alternative multidisciplinary psychology based on the work of James, Jung, and Hillman. Dr. Bouse holds doctorates in psychology and history, American studies, and she is the author of 3 published books: Neo Shamanism and Mental Health, published in 2019, Transgenerational Colonialism, Wounding, Overcoming, and the Reconstruction of the Collective and Personal Identity, which was published in 2021, and Finding the Phoenix, 7 Tools for Transformative Self-Discovery, 2022. And I know she's working on another book as we speak, which will be published soon. She has presented workshops and classes on these subjects at professional and academic conferences in the US and in UK, and edited a special issue of the Journal of Humanistic Psychology, exploring anomalous phenomena and worldviews. Teaching is one of her passions, and she offers online courses, workshops, and private tutorials through the Institute. She's a professional member of the American Psychology Association, the British Psychology Society, the Parapsychological Association, and the International Network of the Study of Spirituality. Dr. Bouse is presently researching and writing 3 new books. Her blog posts on a variety of topics are available at the address institute-ep.com, as well as social media. So, Carol, I'm really looking forward to hear your presentation today. We have talked several times before tonight, and I'm very, very curious to hear how it all works.
Okay, thank you, Annalisa. I appreciate it. That was a long bio. I didn't know I had written so much. Okay, I'm in the United States. Is anybody else in the US? Anybody? Okay, nobody that I can see. Okay, so most of you all are over in Europe and the UK, I take it. So it's kind of evening there. So you all have had your day already, and this is your evening entertainment. So hopefully you will find it fun. You will find it engaging, but I will understand if you're tired and you go to sleep in the middle of it. I won't take it personally. It looked, just from reading through the bios and interest on the link, it seems like there's a lot of corroborative activities going on. There's an interest in the arts, an interest in spirituality, an interest in helping people to help themselves and giving them the tools to help themselves. And it was interesting. I just saw this quote from Einstein that says, once you stop learning, you start dying. And I think that we're all in it together, in that we're all just learning. I think that the best we can do, because this is somewhat uncharted territory, the best we can do is share what we've found, share what we've discovered. I don't think that any one person knows about anything completely. There's always more to learn. And that's one of the fascinating things about psychology, is that it's a huge field that is open to a lot of discovery and exploration. Because it's a fairly long program, I'd like to kind of break things up a little bit. I'm going to give information in sections, and at the end of the section, give a chance for y'all to ask questions or make comments so that we have a little Q&A breaking up the sections for a lot of reasons. One is just so that nobody's sitting for an hour and a half without participating if they don't want to. And secondly, there may be things that you miss or that you have questions about. And it might be helpful to get that clarified. I know that a lot of you are doing some really interesting work, and I'm sure I'd love to hear about it, and especially if it's pertinent to the discussion. But if for matter, if you do want to talk about your work, please wait until the Q&A at the end of the session, which should be about 20 minutes or so. So that's plenty of time. So let's try and keep on track because there is an awful lot of material. Okay, this is kind of fascinating. We've got, on one hand, we've got expressive arts. On the other hand, we've got neo-shamanic practice. And how do we pull this all together to work synchronistically and synergistically in order to benefit students, clients, and broaden the knowledge base so that people can do their own research based on what we've already established. Just going to say a couple things. There is an absolutely inexorable bonding and enmeshment that I have found between shamanism, the numinous or the spirit world, and magic. There is a magical element, with the definition of magic being things that we don't understand, but we can see manifest. There's a lot of mystery about it. There are things we don't get. Maybe we'll never get them, but it's fun to try. There are alternative potential therapies that cut through, bypass the rational cerebral wiring that we have. And these are the ones that get to the root causes of issues. These are the things that cut to the chase. We can rationalize all kinds of things. Expressive arts and neo-shamanic technique are two alternative therapeutic methods that can absolutely bypass all of the reasons, rationality, the stories we tell ourselves. Especially the expressive arts are very capable of creating catharsis, which is really important. The other thing is that it opens the doors to what I like to tell clients and students is really your superpowers that we all have that are sadly underutilized in our current societal paradigms. These are creativity, imagination, recognizing and utilizing neurodiversity, interdimensional awareness, and intuition. These are things we all have to a greater or lesser degree. But these are not things that we see them in comic books, we see them in sci-fi movies and read about them in books. But I mean, how many of you actually stop and think, wow, I can do this? I've had prophetic dreams. Okay. I've seen this ghost of my grandmother. What can I create? When we think of creativity, a lot of times what we're thinking about is Rembrandt and Beethoven and these incredible artists that made these remarkable contributions to the world. But Ruth Richards, who's written about this a lot, talks about what she calls everyday creativity, which is not the big C creativity, but the small c creativity. And this is the ability to to decorate a room, or to create a beautiful table setting, or make a meal, or fix a car. I mean, fixing a car is hard, right? Not that many people know how to do it, and you have to have a certain amount of skill. I know in theory how to change a tire. The way I change a tire is I call my husband. I say, honey, I need my tire changed, and there he is. So it's, these are things that it's within us to do, and this separates us, I think, as humans from other animals on the planet. I know there are elephants that can paint. I know there are horses that can sing, but it's not the same thing. It's not that creative spark that just boom, and there it is. And it's fascinating. And there's a whole field of creativity studies, which is getting a lot of attention now, which I think is about time. And all of this adds to what the ancient Egyptians referred to as the portal to greater understanding, and that is gnosis. The knowledge of the self, the knowledge of what Hillman would say is your soul, your genius, your demon, that light within you that connects you to everything seen and unseen. It connects you to the sacred. It connects you to the creative force of the universe. You can call it God, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but it is. And globally, cross-culturally, people recognize this, and they recognize this connection. So we're talking about some major ideas that how can we learn more? How can we put these to work for us so that we can live our lives exploring our potential and giving it expression? Because that's what a lot of life is, instead of just settling. So let's start with shamanism. Okay. Shamanism is not a religion. Shamanism is a technique. It is cross-cultural. It is based in spirituality and in religion. And it is a technique for the interaction and engagement with the numinous for guidance, healing, and magical power. Most shamans are of indigenous cultures or ancient cultures. They're traditional shamans. They belong or belonged to societies and cultures that recognized the mechanics within that technique and understood that there were people who had the skill and the ability. Their genius was their ability to communicate with the spirits of the earth and the spirits of the gods. And part of the issues with Neo-shamanism, which I will get into, is we don't, in the contemporary Western world, we don't have those, we don't have that context. We don't have that cultural context because of the way our history went, and we're the products of that. So what does a shaman do exactly? Okay, the shaman is an individual who, at will and with specific focus, enters an altered state of consciousness in which he or she can perceive entities and phenomena and access information and knowledge and insight that is not perceivable through the physical senses. Okay, it's not so much that you go someplace else. You simply shift your consciousness and your perceptual focus. And Stanley Krippner and Adam Rock did some wonderful work on this back in the 90s. And I happen to agree with them. You're welcome to agree. But I mean, the whole idea is you haven't left the building, okay? You haven't left the house. You've gone from the living room to the kitchen. Okay, you're just shifting it. We do this all the time. We do this when we're in a flow state, for example. We do this when we're sleeping, obviously, in dreams, when the entire executive brain function is shut down. Okay, and the limbic system is just having a field day, making its movie and showing it on the screen of your altered state of consciousness as you sleep. What is the difference between, for example, a shamanic state of consciousness and a schizophrenic episode? If these things are around all the time, these entities are around all the time, but we just can't hear them or see them or perceive them, but schizophrenics can. What makes that different? What makes the shaman's work different? And again, it is the ability to, at will, enter that specific altered state with a specific focus in mind. Okay, so whereas in a schizophrenic episode, the person doesn't have any agency over these perceptions. They can't shut them off. They are at the mercy of the perception rather than the phenomena, rather than the phenomena being at their mercy. And that's one of the things that Eliade kind of skates around in his book on shamanism, which was one of the, back in the 60s, which was one of the prime books that kind of got Michael Harner started. Michael Harner founded the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. He was an anthropologist. I don't know how many of you are familiar with him, but Harner did one of the greatest things ever in actually bringing shamanic practice into consciousness of the American mainstream through the New Age movement. But he, through the foundation, also was able to revive shamanic practice in places where it had been wiped out. For example, among the Sami Lapps, especially the countries that were under Soviet rule during Stalin. Stalin basically wiped out shamanism in Siberia, and village shamans ended up burying their drums and accoutrements in order to save their lives. They had to stop this. So it's been in decline, and now people like Harner, people like Eliade really reignited the interest in it. And there's a downside to that too, which we'll get into. So one of the interesting things about the journey state, or that what Harner referred to as the shamanic state of consciousness, is it has its very own particular little specific neurobiology, because Michael Winkelmann, who was also an anthropologist, has written some wonderful books on shamanism in an anthropological context. But there have been experiments that they have done in lab clinical settings dealing with shamans who were in the shamanic state. And what they have found out, and this is what makes it so fascinating to work with, is that both the limbic system, which enables us to perceive things outside of the realm of sensory cognition, and the executive brain, the cerebral cortex, are working in concert with the hippocampus being the director, being the orchestra conductor. So what this means, and I did this when I was doing my dissertation research, someone can be in a journey state. They can be in that state of, it's almost a stage 2, deep stage 2 sleep. So you've got the brain waves are larger and they're slower. They're in that state and they are doing a shamanic journey. They have entered that state with focus and will, and they can narrate out loud what is going on while in the journey state, which is really exciting, because what that does is, in a therapeutic setting, you can record that journey and have that recording as a text for your client or your students to use, and as a reference as to what's going on around a particular issue. Okay. The other aspect of it is that as people are narrating and that journey, the journey actually is on tape, you can pick out those phenomenon and start to get an idea of greater consciousness. You know, which phenomena keep showing up in different people. What are the similarities? What are the differences? What are the known archetypes? What is the stuff that comes from who knows where? And it starts to give us kind of an overview of greater consciousness. So that's kind of exciting. So there is a definite neurobiology at work. You know, how do you get into that state? Traditionally, a lot of people, a lot of cultures have used drugs, obviously, alcohol, have used sleep deprivation, pain, for example, the Sundance of the Lakota, have used food deprivation, isolation, sensory deprivation. So there are all kinds of ways to do it. Drumming is a very accessible and relatively safe way to go about doing any kind of shamanic journey work, because especially if you do it group or in a therapeutic setting where you have somebody there with you, and you can also abort the journey if things get really kind of hairy. You know, if some stuff starts to go really haywire and your threshold is reached, and it's like, okay, I can get back. You can stop a drum, you can't stop a drug. So that's another aspect of it. The drumming is the technique that Harner used, and I think that most neo shamans today use the drumming because it is controllable, and it is not as it doesn't have the physical effects that a drug can have. And nobody really wants to go without eating for a long time. I mean, it just doesn't work. Traditional shamanism has used art modalities, visual, musical, dance, drama, as part of religious or healing rituals or spiritual rituals. The traditional shaman works within a community. He or she is a community resource. It's kind of like the old town doctor. And but they were part of the community. They were not somebody set aside. And they would help with the work. They would help with the harvest, taking care of the kids, just integral parts of the community. And if somebody came down with some sort of ailment, family would come and ask for the help. The people in the community believed that this would work, and they often, James McLennan, who was another anthropologist, and I forget his first name, Holtkrantz, who did a lot of work on Southwest Native American shamanic practices. They basically saw how the community became part of the healing ritual. It was a huge thing. For example, there were sand paintings, like with the Hopi. There was almost a ritual theater going on where the community would be drumming or dancing or singing or just adding their energy to what was going on between the shaman and the patient or the client or whatever. The shaman worked for the community at the request of the community. And again, that's a difference with these traditional cultures and the way things are in the contemporary Western world. So the shaman could find out information about food, for example, the movement of herds, the weather. They could ask the gods. The shaman does not do the work. The shaman is an intermediary, which means the shaman in the journey state goes to the gods and says, look, I need some help with this. The community needs some help with this. Where can we find the herd of buffalo or wildebeest or whatever? What can we do to save the crops? We haven't had rain for 2 moons. Are there any enemies that are coming to attack us? What do we need to look out for? This person needs healing. There's something terribly wrong with them. What can you do? Show us what to do. And the gods work through the shaman to perform rituals, to perform healing rites, to actually be the conduit. The shaman becomes the conduit of that spiritual power and transmits that to the patient, if it's a healing situation, so that the patient can heal themselves, or speaks as the god to give information to the community and says, there's not going to be rain for another X amount of time, but this is what you can do to save your crops. Or this is where the herds are. And I mean, and the fact that art is involved, we see that, as I said, the Hopi sand paintings are a good example. The dancing of the dancers of the Hopi dressed as kachinas, okay, who were a combination of animal spirits and gods, very much like the ancient Egyptians. When you look at the cave paintings at Lascaux of these incredibly realistic paintings of bison running, that in a cave, there's a very shamanic, that's very indicative of a shamanic practice. You paint, you see something, the shaman shows you something, you paint it. And we'll get into this with expressive arts, because by painting it or acting it out or singing it or dancing it, you take those energies and you give them form. They're no longer these wispy things that are out there, okay? They have specific form. They have a form in the material world. And that makes it manifest. And that's where you start getting the magical element. And the thing is, this works a lot of times. It really does. So that is shamanism. It is a technique. So let's take our first little break, and let me ask if there's anybody that has a question or comment, please speak up. Oh, this is good. I put you to sleep already. I guess I can leave.
Mia has a question.
I have a question.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I'm fascinated listening, and I find it easier to listen if my hands are busy. So I'm actually doing a bit of art as we're going. And it's really interesting to hear about shamanism. I'm training in shamanism myself. I was interested about the, whether you'd say, or maybe you're coming to this already, saying a bit more about that cultural context. So I'm studying the core shamanism with a school called the Sacred Trust here in the UK, but also they run a course on European bee shamanism. So there's a sense of, you know, the core shamanism and then sort of kind of a line or tradition sort of coming in. And yeah, I just was curious to hear you say a bit more about what that might bring or not bring, or yeah, to shamanic practice, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And it's a very pertinent question because it is cross-cultural. The idea is there. It's like music. Music is cross-cultural, but it is expressed differently through different cultures. And again, you're right, I am going to get to this in the discussion of Neo-shamanism, which is coming up. But you have in Europe, I mean, we're all tribal. Okay, we were all tribal, transgenerationally. We've got that knowledge in our DNA. We've got that understanding, those abilities in our DNA. You all have the benefit of having reminders of that culture. Okay, you have ruins of temples, you have stone circles, standing stones, sacred sites, haunted hills, you have the fairy culture, you have everything over there that reminds you that there is a parallel universe and you can tap into it. And you see it all the time, it's all around you, it's very, very present there. I love being over there for that reason, among others. Over here, okay, we don't have it. We don't have it. I mean, except for the Native American tribes, all the other ethnic groups in the United States, okay, came over from Europe and or other places in the world, and we left those old ways behind, and there's nothing here to remind us. And one of your benefits is having the access to learn about that specific ethnic connection that you have to shamanism there. I think that's great. Can you tell me a little bit more about what this, what is it, bee shamanism you said?
Yeah, I don't know all that much about it just yet, just learning. But yeah, so there's not much I can share on that just now. But yeah, I just wondered, you know, how important that was, you know, in this day and age, you know, especially taking the work, you know, with clients. And but I suppose, yeah, thinking about it, you know, with your example of music and you know, and art, you know, how important is it for the you know, people that you work with who are sort of coming for healing and things, to actually enable their own expression of their sort of culture and what they're bringing through the tech, you know, and even though you're bringing a certain sort of way of working or the techniques that one's learned either through these core or whatever it might be. Maybe I'm rambling here a bit too much, but
No, not at all.
Yeah, yeah, maybe I'll press pause there.
Yes,
I think it's an interesting one because, as you rightly suggest, in Europe we're in an easier position to contact it, and certainly if we look at the writings of Aristotle and the ancient Greeks, they were using charms, they were using songs, and so on. So there is a line through in Europe back into ancient Egypt. But I know that when I speak in America about these things, that there's a real risk of appropriation, and that in a sense the indigenous peoples are aware of that quite strongly. Whereas when I speak about it in Europe, I speak about the line to the ancient Greeks. We can learn from the culture, but we have a line of our own going back through. And I think, I don't know, I'd be interested to ask you how you, in a sense, you've done quoted a lot of First Nation peoples in that. But how do you manage to do that in the States without being accused fairly regularly of appropriation?
That's a good question. And a lot of people don't. A lot of people are very blatantly appropriative. And it has angered a lot of the First Nation people, and rightly so. And rightly so. And I get that. It's a real sticky wicket. And I found that for me personally, I mean, I could go back to my Celtic roots, okay, and say there was that. But at the same time, it's like, how many generations removed am I from that? Which, maybe 13, 14, 18th century. I mean, so I find that going at it through a psychological context is, to me, more comfortable, because I'm coming at it as a psychologist using a technique, and teaching it as a technique for self-exploration, as opposed to, coming out and saying, I can do this. Does that make any sense? It's hard to say, but I have tried over the years, and I've been working with this for more years than I would care to admit to. But it is something that you have to be sensitive to that and give credit where credit is due, and don't try to be something you're not. Does that make any sense? It's hard to articulate, but
yes, I could see where you're going, because the way you talk about consciousness, because in a sense, by equating it with consciousness, you've got a slightly different view from the traditional shamanic view, which is that the shaman does actually travel to another world. That's how it's seen there. And you're equating that with changes in consciousness. So in a sense, you've put that into a Western frame. So I can see the way in which you're doing it. And I think it's an interesting way of doing it. But I mean, it's something that interests me a great deal, and so on. But I feel safer in Europe in that we're doing is rediscovering something of our own culture rather than borrowing things from other people's.
Exactly.
And I feel happier in doing that. And one of my students has done some detailed work on particularly Aristotle and those Greeks, so that there was that line going back there. And it was, of course, Christianity that had a big hand in wiping it all out. And
Yes.
your problem in the States is that in general, the people coming in were Christians, so we're already in the frame of this is not right. So I think that makes your situation more difficult than perhaps ours, who are actually in Europe. So I mean, I think it's a really interesting discussion, and thank you for explaining it so clearly.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I will say this, there are little pockets here. And I feel very fortunate because I live in one of them, which is the Appalachians, the Southern Appalachians, where you had basically about the last wave of the Scots-Irish that came over with an attitude, right? Because they had been pushed out of Scotland, and then they were pushed out of Ulster and sent over here. And most of the good land, okay, by the coast and in the Piedmont sections, was taken already. So they got pushed into the mountains. They have a very, very fascinating culture that has so many elements of magic and shamanism. And there's a woman named Byron Ballard who lives over in Asheville, North Carolina, and she's done some amazing, she is of that descent, and she's done some amazing work researching and writing books on what she calls hill folk hoodoo. And what she talks about is that there are all these little techniques that people do that are very shamanic, very mystic. But the Scots-Irish were mainly Presbyterian. They were very fundamentalist to a large extent. And that's a big part of it. So what they'll do is, if, let's say, their neighbor does something they don't like, they'll make a war bottle. Okay, so they'll take a bottle and they'll just put all the nasty stuff that they can pick up and put a curse in it. And then they will tape to the bottle a biblical text. Like, loving your neighbor and all this, because that makes it right. Okay, they're walking to, they've got a foot in each world. And I think that's fascinating. And it's just, people don't know about it. The sad thing is now people are finding out this is a great place to retire. So we've got a lot of people from outside coming in, and I'm afraid that culture is going to get compromised. I don't know why I went off with that, but yeah.
Can I just ask you one thing on that? Do you get your drums from the indigenous people, or do you make your own drums?
I don't know what most people do, honestly.
What do you do?
I have one drum that I have had for almost 35 years.
Did you make it?
No, I can play the piano, but I can't make a drum.
Okay.
But there was an artisan who was, Western, American, and he made drums. He didn't do it as a shaman or anything like that. He just did it as an artist, worked through a store that specialized in folk music and traditional instruments.
Okay.
And so he made this fantastic drum that I requested that he make. And there is nothing that sounds like that drum, man. You can hear voices in that drum. It is amazing. But it did not come from an indigenous person. I mean, he did it as a musician and a folk artist.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay, thank you. But that's a good question. I don't know what other people do.
Well, some people birth their own drums. That's what some of them call it, birthing the drum, making it their own with their own energy, and it's making it a spiritual. The birthing is a spiritual path itself.
That's very cool. That must be very powerful. If I could have made my own drum, I would have. But I saw that would be a train wreck. So I'm just honored my limitations. But thank you. Are there any other questions before we get started on Neo-shamanism? Annalisa.
Yeah, just a quick footnote. As an anthropologist, I will post it if I can do so. Charles Stepanov is an anthropologist who worked with Siberian populations, tribes, and in the article that he wrote, he described shamans as something that their own people looked with suspicion, because, as you mentioned earlier, the difference between schizophrenic and shamans, people were never quite sure how good they were at controlling spirits. And so they were always very watchful of how a shaman behaved. And occasionally they would kill them if they thought that they couldn't control their spirits, because then evil spirits would come out of them, because they eat the spirits and put them in pockets in their body. That's the belief, that they have pockets in their body where they keep the evil spirits. But, these evil spirits can always come out. So I wonder whether that's a way of, it looks like there is a fine line between schizophrenia and shamanism that can be crossed at any moment by the shamans themselves, or perhaps what people think. It's not necessarily the shaman, but so all I'm saying is I would be careful of romanticizing shamans in shamanic cultures, because their life is not an easy life. They often live on their own. So because people are afraid of them, so they tend to live by themselves, and there is always a little bit of suspicion between the tribe and the shaman. So I'm just saying it's not an easy life. It might sound like they're these holy people, but it's not always the case.
No, that's a really good point. And this is a good segue into the neo-shaman thing, because it has been romanticized to a large extent. And I have had classes where, making the introductions, and somebody sits there like, well, I want to be a shaman. Really? Yeah, I want to be able to make some money doing that. And I have kicked them out. Okay, it's like, it's not my responsibility what you do with the knowledge, but I'm not going to give you those tools. Okay, if that's what you want, go somewhere else. Because whether it's a belief that they have it, an indigenous belief that they hold the evil spirits in their pockets, the truth of the matter is, and people don't get this, there's a very fine line, as you said, not so much between schizophrenia. Well, there is, but it's between in our clinical culture, between schizophrenia and shamanic practice, but also in more indigenous or even medieval terms, between sorcery and shamanic practice. And then it becomes ethics. Okay, and Stanley Krippner is just huge on this. And it's like, if you cross that line and you start manipulating things, you've crossed the line between shamanism and sorcery. Okay. And there's a lot of sorcery in traditional shamanism. Eliade writes a lot about it. Winkelmann writes a lot about it. It's just loaded. So if you're learning this technique, if you're learning some of the more advanced stuff, not the stuff for self-discovery or even the core shamanism, but getting into the more advanced stuff, you have to be very strong, because you have to understand that if you have the ability to get the gods to heal something, you have the power to get the gods to destroy it. And I hate to bring Star Wars into that because it's kind of hokey now, but that episode in The Empire Strikes Back, where Luke goes into the cave and he meets his father, and it's Darth Vader. It's that decision. In fact, that's one of the main themes of the whole thing, which Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, basically directed through Lucas. But it was like, that's one of the big ones. You have that power. How are you going to use it? And it's very easy to be tempted to use it to coerce or facilitate something unconscionable doing to somebody else. It's scary stuff. People that go into it and say, I want to be a shaman, have no idea what they're talking about. And as Stanley always said, if you run across somebody that tells you they're a shaman, run far, run fast, scream loudly, because most of them won't say, oh, by the way, what do you do? Oh, I'm a shaman. It's like, oh, okay, cool, great. Yeah, I'm just saying. And it's just a really good point. So getting into neo-shamanism, what is the difference between neo-shamanism and traditional shamanism? We've already talked about it. Neo-shamans not have the cultural context for the technique or the practice. Because of Christianity, because of science, of rationality, which are part of our accepted overarching paradigm, right? Shamanism does not fit in there. Magic does not fit in there. Okay. So someone who wants to practice shamanism is, a lot of them, particularly in this country, are also Wiccan practitioners. Okay, practice Wicca. There's a lot of New Age, which has a tendency to romanticize it. And there's a lot of appropriation that I've seen going on. Now, that's not everybody, but I'm just giving examples of how this plays out, because they're looking for a context. Okay, they're looking for a matrix that doesn't exist in contemporary Western culture. It is a little better in Europe, but in the US, it's just it just isn't there. And there's also not support. Okay, I mean, there is, in our psychological practice, nothing that smacks of mysticism or interdimensionality is accepted, unless you're a member of an indigenous group. If somebody has a spiritual experience, a great epiphany, just speaks to, has an encounter with the spirit, and they're free. Okay, they're totally knocked sideways. They go to a doctor, they go to the emergency room, they go to a psychologist, man, they will have you on that schizophrenia spectrum in a heartbeat. They will prescribe you something to make you better, because if you are a basically Euro-American, these things don't happen to you. Okay, you want to think about that for a minute. That's a little weird in and of itself. But that is the context that people in this country, in the US, that's what they're dealing with. So you have to be very, very quiet about it. You have to be very cool about it, or you have to frame it in a way that fits in with the cultural paradigm, even if it's hanging on the edge of it. Okay, you still want to stay within that boundary. The other thing is, you have the cultural appropriation. There's limited connection to past generational tribal practices. And so what's around are the Native Americans. Now, I mean, some people who are of African or Caribbean descent go back to the Caribbean practices, which are very, very powerful things. And there's a lot of interesting aspects to it. But mostly people look to the Native Americans, which, it's like, be what you are. Don't try to be somebody else. Don't try to be Native American. Okay, you're not. So every time he sees people with the feathers and all this kind of stuff, and it's like, what's really there? You would have to ask. And again, this is part of identity issues that we have culturally. And it can, because they don't have that cultural understanding, they don't have the cultural context, they don't learn these things from the time they're children. Okay, they come into it and it's like a college course. Like, oh, I'm going to take a class in shamanism. You're not going to have the same thing. You're not going to have that enic understanding of it. You can only have an edic understanding of it, And that can give you a lot of information, but at the same time, and you can use it, but you use it from the context of who you are. There's some really scary stuff that's involved in this, and people don't understand it, and it can backfire. And one of the big problems is what's called spiritual bypassing. And that can be really dangerous, because it's not just in shamanism, but it's in other things too. Is like, you know, I'm a spiritual person. I'm talking to spirit. Spirit will guide me. And I know these things, and I can tell you things, and I can bring you enlightenment. And they're out there, you know, they're out there. And what happens, and Masters has done some great work on this, is it's like you're living in the penthouse of a 7-story building, but there isn't anything connecting the foundation to the penthouse. So when something happens, like a traumatic event or a personal loss, all of a sudden this spiritual stuff won't sustain them. So there's a real crisis of identity, a real crisis of belief, and people can get really messed up with that. So again, but you don't go into it knowing about any of this stuff. So that's a temptation that needs to be avoided. It can be neo-shamans practitioners, and I refer to a neo-shamanic practitioner is somebody who can use shamanic techniques to help other people. And Mia, I saw your chat question. And yes, there can be surprisingly, amazingly powerful and effective work that they can do as that mediator between the energy of spirit and the physical. But it requires several factors that have to be present and working synergistically, because if any of these are missing, it's not going to work. Remember, you're not doing it, it's the spirits are doing it at your request. Okay. And at the end of the day, it is the person who is being helped who can heal themselves. They're the only ones that can do it. Nobody can do it for them. There's no magic wand. I mean, there isn't. What these elements are belief. Patient has to believe that it's going to work. Empathy. There has to be empathy between the healer and the patient. Hypnosis is a big part of it. You start getting along with altered states, you've got those drums going. Okay, the person that's the healer is not the only one hearing them. Okay, so the patient is actually in an altered state as well. You can't help but be. And they have to understand what's going on, and they have to participate in it. They have to be actively participating. And back in the 70s, there were a couple in Minnesota, Simonsons, who worked with doctors at the Mayo Clinic with cancer patients, using shamanic techniques on cancer patients. And what they discovered is that the patients who bought into it and participated in their own healing from a shamanic perspective, like working with animal spirits and that sort of thing, had a much higher cure and remission rate than the others. And that was a long time ago. There has to be consensual intent between the healer and the person being healed. Okay, they have to be on the same page about what's going on and what they're doing. Okay. And because if they're not, there's just a disconnect. Okay. And again, what the whole ritual does, the whole protocol, is it enables the opening of the way from the world of spirit to the one being healed, to enable that person to heal themselves. The healing comes from within. So yeah, there's definitely an upside to neo-shamanic practice. But again, it's coming from a different cultural matrix than from traditional or indigenous societies. And again, the expressive art modalities are very powerful tools in dealing with neo-shamanic work, whether, I mean, using it even in self-exploration that I do with students and clients is if they have a journey, act it out. We create a drama around it, or reenact it like you do with dream theater, or just drawing it. They saw this entity, draw it. What did it look like? What did the scene look like? Tell the story. You know, what was the story of this journey? So that's a good segue into the into the expressive arts, because you do have the ability of the expressive arts when they're engaged with this kind of work to enhance whatever you're doing. So if you're dealing with a client that you're helping to heal themselves, let them use expressive arts to document and journal what they're going through, what they're seeing, what they're experiencing. Part of the difference between, again, traditional shamans, I'm just going to take this out of neo-shamanism and mental health. And I'm just going to run through this quickly, okay? But the difference between a shamanic culture and a non-shamanic culture for shamanic practice. In shamanic cultures, there is usually a near-death experience or something traumatic, an illness, as a call to service. People don't want to be shamans. It's something that comes to them, okay? Not so much. It does happen here. And I'm not saying there aren't some neo-shamanic practitioners that are legitimate shamans, but not traditional shamans. So I'm not saying everybody here is bogus. They're not. There are some really good, powerful people out there. Experience of a psychotic break. Okay, that at least it goes into the schizophrenia aspect. That's sometimes it happens in our culture. Sometimes there is a psychotic break in a traditional culture. Again, traditional shamans have a culture that supports the shamanic worldview. Not so much here. Trained by a tribal shaman. Yes, very frequently in indigenous cultures. No, here, no. Sometimes they are, but people travel to the Amazon. Amazon shamans are just raking these days with the whole ayahuasca craze. A lot of people coming down, spending a lot of money to have these experiences, and they're paying. They don't, and the people down there don't care, because it's like, hey, they want to give us money, we'll give them what they want. But they have no way to conceptualize it. So there's a lot of problems that come. Now, there's a book coming out called The Ayahuasca Labyrinth, which hopefully will be out soon. But it's an interesting book about this whole phenomenon going on down there. Culture validates the dream time, the area between the worlds, the twilight zone, as it were. Yes, in tribal cultures, no, not so much here. Validates spiritual healing within the culture, very definitely in tribal cultures. Again, not so much here. Sometimes it does. I mean, you've got faith healings. In fundamentalist Christianity, you've got a lot of faith healing and that sort of thing. And there's always been, there have been stories about people who can heal, healers, but it's not normal. It's not usual. Okay. Trained through 9 non-tribal protocols. No, if you're a tribal shaman, you are trained through the tribal protocols. Not so much here. Being recognized as a shaman by society or community. Yes, in a tribal culture, no. You know, this is not a job that you will see in the U.S. Department of Labor Dictionary of Occupational Titles. Okay, it's just not there. Okay, shamans in ancestry sometimes, but usually they're known in a tribal culture. It's generational. It's passed down in families. Sometimes here, but we don't know. You know, we just don't know. Culture recognizes shamanic practice. Yes, tribally. No, here. Undergoes initiation as a shaman. That sounds like fun if you read the accounts. Yes, in tribal societies, no. You know, social belief in magic. A lot of tribal cult, a lot of magic in a lot of tribal cultures. No, for here. Sacred ritualistic drug use. Very much so in tribal cultures. Not so much here. You can have some fun with it, but it's not recognized as a ritual drug use. Okay. Experiences in cultural dissonance. If you do these things, if you're practicing, if you're a Neo-shamanic practitioner, no, there's no cultural dissonance down in some of these traditional cultures, but definitely yes here. There are also things, for example, there's a different concept about death in these cultures. There's a different concept about the presence and continued existence of the ancestors. Changes the whole ball game. It changes your, what Heidegger called your design, your way of being in the world. The other thing too, and this is huge, is that these traditional cultures are by and large animistic. The sacred is in everything. The trees are sacred and have sentience. The animals are sacred and have sentience. In our culture, which is based on Abrahamic beliefs, it's a transcendent creator God that's up there. Okay, and every now and then he has complete control, but this is just something he did. Okay, and we're answerable only to God. So nature, which is one of the great portals to mysticism and greater knowledge, as is art, it's one of the two, has been completely disempowered. And it's been, you know, it's like, oh, just go cut down that tree. I don't like where it's sitting, you know, just go out and shoot crows. It's like, no, you don't do that. Okay, they don't understand there is a complete disconnect in our society about the presence of the mythic and the numinous in nature and its entire sacred aspect, and that we're part of that. We've to a large extent, we've taken the sacred out of our own being. And it kind of shows, I think, in the way we treat each other. You know, and I mean, that's just my personal opinion, but I digress. So that's pretty much me. I hope I answered your question a little bit with that, and Jill, you as well. Those are the differences. Okay, that does not mean it's not a major therapeutic tool or can't be used for good, but there are a lot of caveats involved and a lot of things that you have to kind of be aware of. You know, I hope I'm not coming across like I'm dissing all of this. I'm not. I'm just weighing the benefits with the pitfalls, you know, and be aware, you know, be aware. Okay, so any questions or comments or anything else?
Lynn, go ahead.
Thank you. I couldn't get in at the beginning, so I was late joining, but can somebody, when you mentioned healers, I do a lot of different healing modalities work. Can somebody be born with shaman connections, or does one have to be part of a tribal background, or do the initiations that you were talking about?
Okay, just define shamanic connections with me. Are
Well,
you talking something
with
ancestral?
with the training that Mia was talking about and that sort of thing. But oh, you mean, sorry, my initial bit. Well, it's just that I've had at least 3 people say to me, "You're a shaman, do you know?" And it's sort of, it was fearful because I thought that I've never done anything about it. I was drawn to shamanism, but I thought, well, I don't know, because I thought, well, how would they know? They're very spiritual beings, so I just wondered how one was very insistent and that I should be doing more about it. So, but I have never done it.
They said that you were a shaman. You didn't say that I'm a shaman.
No, but I've always been drawn towards it since I was young. For some reason.
That's the difference. That's the difference. They recognized you as something.
Right.
And if they are people that recognized it and saw that in you, yeah, you probably want to do something about it. Learn how to use it.
But I don't know how to go about that. That's what I'm saying, you know.
Mia, what is the group that you were talking about before?
Oh yeah, so I mean, there seems to be a lot of courses now that one could do for shamanism. I've been doing quite a lot with the Sacred Trust, and I'm going to be doing a bit more training with them. They run really good courses, I think. And but yeah, there's many others. I did do one with a course which was the sort of bridging the world, so bringing some of the shamanic techniques to bridge with psychotherapy. So I'm a therapist. Yeah, so it's just a question of kind of having a look around and then maybe trying one. But yeah, that's the one that I've had the most experience with, and I'm very fond of.
What did you call that, Mia? Bridging the world?
Yeah, that was a course that I did with somebody called Krista McKinnon, who's written some books on shamanism, and yeah, that was a lovely course to do, and that was about just taking some of those shamanic practices and then using that, like working with the wheel or doing the journey. You know, use ceremonies with clients, and yeah, that's the one. Yeah, with Krista.
Who was Chris? What was their name?
Krista McKinnon. I'll put that in the title of the book in the chat. How's that?
I actually do counselling as well, and I have amazing experiences when I'm doing that with clients. So I just thought, thank you for that. Anyway.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Carl.
Yeah, I just wanted to chip in regarding Lynn's question. A couple of things, again, from anthropological ethnographic literature. One is, at least for the Uyghurs people or the Siberian tribes, shamans are born everywhere in the world. So it's not something that belongs to their culture exclusively. And the key here, I think the key word here is they are born. Shamans are born. They don't become. It's not that somebody can learn to be a shaman and become a shaman. They are born with particular powers or abilities, which usually have to do with the spirits and being able to communicate with the spirits. And be able to travel. They call them shift shapers because they're able to travel from one world to the other and come back. And that's the important part, because people who are not shamans cannot come back. It leads to insanity. So if you are not a shaman and you go out in the jungle or in the steppe or wherever, and you're on a hunting trip, hunters try to identify with their prey. So they do a series of rituals the night before in order to enter the psyche of their prey. And then when they go hunting, they mimic the prey and they attract the prey to them. The problem becomes when they've been out for a very long time, they start believing they are the prey. And then they believe that they become the bears, or they become the reindeers, or they become, you know, whatever, the jaguars. And then they go into this trips, literal mental trips, where they are lost for days and days and days, living like these animals, believing that they are living with these animals because they think that animals are people anyway. So, so that's where the difference there between shamans and non-shamans is that the shaman is able to come back to be a human, and they're able to, you know, go in and out of this world, while non-shamans risk never to come back. So they become insane. It's really interesting for me to listen to Carol and you know, people who study shamanism, because it feels to me like it's a different metaphor to talk about mental illnesses. You know, when people lose their mind, indigenous people talk about going into a world and not coming back from that world. So the other thing that just a quick, no, it doesn't matter. But for Carol's, I guess my question is, if indigenous people believe that shamans are born, and therefore they start looking for signs from the very beginning, even from birth, how do we, so that's kind of, next month I will do my talk about Marina Abramovich, and she's an artist who also very early on showed the signs of being able to see spirits and ghosts, and she wasn't afraid of them since she was a child, and she's had all kinds of perceptions like clairvoyance and so on and so forth. And so my thesis is that she was born a shaman, and therefore she became an artist, because that was the only domain where she could act her shamanic nature without perhaps the stigma, although she's getting it anyway. But so I think, going back to Lynn, I think that possibly people who go into the arts, who are born shamans, they go into the arts because they're able to express that side of them, which in a non-artistic environment simply wouldn't be accepted, or it would be stigmatized. But artists seem to have a lot more freedom. We give artists a lot more freedom to be whatever they want. And I know you're a painter, so.
Yes, it's making me feel really emotional, this. So something, I will thank you for the connections in the chat. I will have a look. Thank you.
You know, being shaman is something you are, not something you do. Okay. And I think that's fairly straightforward. So thank you for that question. And Annalisa, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to your presentation September, right? September. Okay. Moving right along into the expressive arts. Okay. What are the expressive arts? Let's talk about them for a moment.
Carol,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I think June wanted to add something.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Yes. Where am I? Yes, I think that to say that shamans are always born is to, I think what the real problem is that shamanism and its ally spirit possession, which is different and is conceived differently, one lot coming really from the north of Europe and America, and the other lot coming largely from Africa, is that in some places they are born, in other places they aren't. In some places, what would be called a psychotic breakdown, particularly for women, particularly in widowhood, is regarded as a call to be a shaman. And we have locked up a lot of our shamans in asylums. I was interested in what you've said about Wiccan, because as somebody's put in the chat, if you want to look for shamanism, then look around Glastonbury, look around the goddess cultures, because the Wicca people are really investigating that. And again, it was very much something that was kept alive in the feminine line. And my meeting with our own traveller communities, many of the women there have still got the gift of second sight and all of that, which would be a tradition coming down through there. I think it's very difficult to generalize because each group of people has got different traditions and different ways of doing it and so on. The other thing is that I think, I'm surprised you haven't mentioned transpersonal psychology, because in England, a lot of it will be coming in that area.
Yes.
And also, I think that that there's a move in the wider society in England, and I can't speak from America, although some of my American friends are writing about it with me, a development of the fact that the whole of the universe is sentient, and that there is no inanimate in the whole universe. And they would be quite happy within Christianity. The view you've presented of Christianity is an old one, but the current thinking is very much that the whole of the universe is animate. And is sentient, and therefore it's not so difficult to put together the shamanic belief system and the sentience of the entire cosmos. And that is, spreading around the environment. Many of the environmentalists around us would believe that, and so on. So I think certainly in England, there's a change in the culture. And many people, I think the most pernicious thing that Western culture ever invented was the notion that anything is inanimate. If we hadn't invented that, and we had the notion of the animateness of the entire cosmos, which is what the Greeks believed, of course, then we wouldn't have got into the mess environmentally. So I think things are changing both within Christianity and in the wider society, which means there's not such a big gap between the thinking of the traditional shamans and theirs. I'm also wondering, I mean, I'm a musician, and the drums, but like ayahuasca, they are not considered inanimate objects, which is why I asked you if you made yours. They are full of spirit. And often the shamans, certainly doing the journeys, the drum itself does the journey and is empowered by the spirit which is in it. And similarly with ayahuasca, it is not a drug. It is a sacred, animate, living thing. And it is prepared not like we would prepare pharmacy, but if you watch the women preparing it, they're praying, they're singing as they do it. So a whole load, and I think that it's a very interesting area, and I'm not so pessimistic in England about it as you are in America, because I think the general culture is moving in that direction.
I would hope so. I really would. I mean, one of the reasons I love going over there, and particularly with the transpersonal psychology division of the BPS, great people in that, and it's it is more open. It is more giving. In the US, it is still very stringent. So I'm hoping that it filters down or filters across the pond or something. But again, it's right now, it's not, it's much freer where you all are than here. And that does make a difference. Thank you. I appreciate what you said.
Sorry, I've got a quick.
The expressive.
Sorry, Carol, hold on. I say we're coming up to 7:30 or 8:30 here in Italy. Are people happy to continue to 8 o'clock? Because Carol has another section to present about the expressive arts, but it will take us to 8 o'clock. Or
sadly, I have to leave, but
you have to leave. Anyone else has to leave? We're happy to stay. You, Alison, you have to go too. Okay, so we'll continue. It's recorded, so people can catch up with the recording. And well, let's just keep going.
Okay, great. All right, I'm glad we're doing the discussion as the point where we're doing it, because I think it's really livening things up and giving a lot of depth to this, which is great. And y'all have been wonderful. Okay, the expressive arts. Okay, the difference between, and I'll try to be quick. The expressive arts are not formalized art. Okay, they don't, to do expressive arts does not require training or years of practice, or it doesn't have an aesthetic component, an aesthetic requirement and expectation. So they're much more spontaneous, and they're a very therapeutically, they're a very good way to get, again, past the cerebral cortex and into the gist of what's going on. They were used a lot. Jung used expressive arts a lot. If you ever see the illustrated version of his Red Book, remarkable work that he did. He was not an artist, but he did some incredible drawings and watercolors based on his visions and his conversations with the spirit of Philemon, who was an old Gnostic priest that communicated with him. The expressive arts have the ability to communicate the essence of the ineffable and facilitate an intersubjective dialogue with what it is expressing and those witnessing it, in order to generate meaning for the audience as well. So, for example, if you look at one of Jung's paintings, he had a specific thing that he was illustrating, but any one of us could look at his painting and there would be, we get into what Gadamer would call a dialogue with it. We would communicate with the painting just silently, but it would mean something in that painting would mean something to us, would resonate with us. And that would be the key to deeper thought or deeper exploration or deeper understanding. Carl Rogers, American psychologist who discovered person-centered psychology, which is based on the fact that the individual knows the answers, has the answers within them, and all they have to do is really, if the therapist can help them ask the right questions and dig deep enough, the person will come up with their own answers, which is a wonderful way to do therapy, and it's kind of the standard now. But he and his daughter Natalie began incorporating expressive arts into their therapeutic practice, and it was a wonderful way for people to express what they saw, what they felt, how they perceived something without having to articulate it, because sometimes the language just doesn't work. So there are modalities to expressive arts. Okay, one is storytelling and poetry. One is music. Another one is visual art. And all of these are very accessible and doable in either a classroom or clinical setting. In visual arts, we take in painting and drawing, sculpture, Play-Doh is fun, film and textile art, quilting, that kind of thing. The fourth one is dance and movement, because your body can tell you a lot about things that are going on within you that you might not even know are there, or something that you've repressed. And the other is drama and theater, which actually takes all of it in and has a somewhat ritual context to it. The expressive arts are great because they don't require specific training. You don't have to employ specific techniques. Okay. Nobody's going to stand over you and say, I'm sorry, that just wasn't quite legato enough. Okay. They're spontaneous and connected to actual feelings and intuitive functions. One of the best things that I found to do was, if there's an emotional issue, have the person that you're working with take a crayon or marker and just talk about the issue while they're scribbling with their non-dominant hand. Because by using the non-dominant hand, you get to a lot of things, and it is fairly amazing what comes out of that. And it's like, they look at it, it's like, I never realized that. It's like, yeah, well, there it is. The expressive arts can represent interdimensional beings, entities, and phenomena. For example, the Kachinas. They provide form and material presence to phenomena, entities, and experiences that are lacking a physical material aspect. What did your grandmother's spirit look like? What did her ghost look like? What was the sound that tree was making? What did that animal tell you? These are things that can be expressed through expressive arts. And it takes it out of the realm of the inexpressible and into the realm of form, where it can be looked at, discussed, and learned from, and our rational and interpretive functions can take over and start to integrate it. Whereas fine or formal art requires a lot of technical training and usually has to conform society and culturally to accepted aesthetic standards and paradigms, you don't have this issue with expressive arts. Nobody's going to tell you it's right or wrong. You don't have to worry about it. And people do, they get really, well, I can't draw, I can draw stick figures. Well, it's like, yeah, well, draw stick figures. Stick figures are great. There's all kinds of art all over the world with stick figures. You know, and it's like going back to when you were a kid, right? You know, you made these great paintings and drawings, and they were brilliant. You knew they were brilliant. Mother told you they were brilliant, so you knew it was right? And there was a big swash of blue for the sky, and then there was this green stuff on the bottom. There's this little boxy thing with a triangle on it. That's your house. And then you have pictures of mommy and daddy. Really nice. Okay, but they're wonderful. They're absolutely wonderful, because the kids can express so much of how they see the world. They're not inhibited, you know. And then you run and show it, you know. It's like, oh, look at this, that's beautiful, put it on the refrigerator. So it's a very joyful experience, and it's fun. Play-Doh is fun. If you have somebody who is furious because somebody did something horrible to them, you know, like their husband left or their boss fired them or whatever, give them some Play-Doh. It's like, okay, you're not dealing, this is not your boss, this is not your husband. This is your feeling about it. Think about it and how you're feeling, and make something out of that Play-Doh, okay? And they look at it, and there's some really god-awful things that come out of this. And it's like, okay, that's your feeling. That illustrates your feeling. Now, all you have to do is smash it. And you can do that. And it's some sort of sympathetic magic, because after they smash it, it's like it's gone. The feeling is gone. So you're not doing anything that is causing harm to anybody else. But what you are dealing with is what you can control, which is how you feel about it. And that's very healthy. It's very healthy. Smashing Play-Doh against the wall is really fun. Really is. And you do it with a sense of play, and the sense of play is extremely important. Man, as we're adults, we forget how to play. And everything is serious. And it's like, no, let's play. Let's have fun with this. It's great in workshops, and especially if you do something like a theater present, you know, do it as a theater, turn it into drama. And so it's all improv, and it's some of the people just laugh because it's serious and it's cathartic, but it's also hilarious. And getting people laughing is one of the best things you can do. We forget how to laugh, particularly at ourselves, you know, and so the arts kind of put us back into that childish mindset where we don't have all the baggage we have as adults, and we can deal with things on a very basic level of release and fun. And, you know, I feel like an idiot. Great, you know, fine. It's very, very therapeutic. And again, how this works in connection with shamanism, shamanic practice, is the same thing. You have a journey, you have an experience, whatever, you turn it into art, not hang in the Louvre kind of art, but just the art that gives that non-material experience and the entities form. Yes. And Lisa. Are you muted? You're muted. Unmute yourself. Unmute.
Okay, sorry, my screen was playing up. Would it help to call it craft instead of art?
I don't know. Crafting is a little bit different because crafting.
I'd like to understand what the difference would be between craft and art.
Crafting has a tendency. It's like a lot of craft is based in what they call everyday creativity and making useful things like quilts. You know, making Christmas tree ornaments. There's an element of the expressive arts, but crafting is a little bit more specified. Okay, you do use certain techniques. Okay, you don't. Making something out of Play-Doh is not quite like making a doll. Okay. So I mean, that's just the short version of it, but yeah, there's a little bit more deliberate. Now you can work a lot of expressive arts into craft. Okay. But, you know, just for therapeutic and culture, you know, educational, there is a difference. And you can use the expressive arts to illustrate and give form to dreams, journeys, negative feelings, disease or injury. It really works if in a neo-shamanic practice, if you're dealing with such things as intrusion removal, depossession, soul retrieval, any kind of healing thing. So by giving form to the ineffable is brought to life and becomes a part of our normal waking consciousness and is perceived through the physical senses and made meaningful by engagement of personal and cultural lenses. In a therapy or self-discovery, self-exploration context, the expressive arts are very good at expanding consciousness through focused altered states, can release traumas through demystifying them and giving them form and giving you control over them, can facilitate physical and mental healing. There's shamanic counseling, which Michael Harner's wife, Sandra, who was a therapist, devised, where actually you use the technique of recording the journey and then using it as a reference to discuss things in a therapeutic manner. This is kind of what Krista McKinnon does as well. They allow for awareness and interaction with the transpersonal and the interdimensional. They enhance creativity through using expressive arts to illustrate non-material phenomena. They illuminate self-discovery by adding perspective. And they bring the non-material world into the physical realm by making it real. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I'm sorry we ran over, but we did. So now we have time to talk about anything.
Yeah, Eilish has a question.
Yes.
Hello, just in relation to the whole thing of the expressive arts, something that I have used, particularly with young people, has not been so much to get them to do something with their hands, I think, but to verbalize using their 5 senses. So what does it look like? You know, described coming in after 4th year in what we call transition year. I'm here in Ireland, and they 4th year doesn't, transition year doesn't prepare you for 5th year. Or I got a whole horde from them, and I said, well, okay, what's it? Was all this sort of tension and fear, and I said, okay, what's it like? So I got them to describe it in words, to actually put it out there. It's the same sort of thing when you said about smashing the thing, it reminded me of it. And so what does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it taste like? What does it smell like? And what does it feel like if you were to touch it? And each time sort of building up, okay, so you're big, you're black, and you're ugly, and I don't like you. And then you sort of, you add the sound to it, and you add the smell to it, and all until you've all 5. And I remember when I said to them, the first time I did it with these young ones, and I said, what was that like? And the young one that was feeding me the what it was like, the others were laughing at me when I was doing it, and of course I was deliberately exaggerating to let them see how it could work. She actually said to me, it was freeing. And to hear a 16-year-old say something like that, there was something very powerful in it. And I did it with others afterwards. And I said to them, you know, this is something, it's not going to happen by magic, but it's something that it's about not letting it run around in your head. So it's not about thinking the words, it's about actually verbalizing them out, putting it out there so that you have control over what's going on. And I said, I know that you probably don't have a room of your own or that, but I said, there's one place you can go and be on your own. Now, sometimes they think they're giving you what you want to hear. And they said, oh, the chapel. I said, do you have a chapel in your house? I didn't have a chapel in my house when I was growing up. And then eventually they wake up, it's the bathroom. And then one of them said, oh, then we could flush it down the toilet. And they had got it. That way, the real sense that they got something in that. So, and it was when you're talking about that sense of breaking, creating something and then breaking it, because you weren't damaging anybody else, and it was, but it was what was going on inside you that was being broken and being worked on. That's reminded me of that particular thing that I have used.
That's fabulous. I love that. I love that. I love flushing it down the toilet. That's
brilliant.
Yeah, and again, when like you said, when a 16-year-old says something like it was freeing, it's like, wow. Yeah.
I wanted to introduce Shamanic to the group. She's running the course I'm doing. Hello?
That you can use it for. You can use it for joy or hope, or, you know, to let
I'm losing connections.
Over.
Yes. Well,